Okay, here's a thought to start us off. What if I told you that despite, you know, all our science, all our knowledge,
Yeah,
nobody actually knows what anything truly is, not in some, like, final, absolute way.
it is a bit startling when you put it like that, isn't it? But yeah, that's pretty much what we're digging into today.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are plunging headfirst into this whole idea that reality, our understanding of it, isn't fixed. It's relative, built on layers and layers of interpretation.
Exactly. And we're going to explore why that might be the case, how our own perception kind of shapes what we take for truth, and well, what that means for finding meaning.
Our main source for this is a really fascinating book, The Abstractionists Papers by Luiz von Paumgartten. And good news, you can actually get it for free at www.welcometothe.bluespace.com.
Yeah, it's great. It uses this model, red space, for our internal world, interpretations, subjectivity.
And Bluespace for the external stuff.
Yeah.
Cause and effect, the interactions happening out there.
Precisely. And using that red-blue framework, it asks this fundamental question. Is the reality we experience basically abstract, something our minds cook up in red space? Or is there some objective, real reality in blue space we can actually grab onto?
Right. And look, we promise this isn't going to be some super dry philosophy lesson.
No, definitely not.
Our aim here is to give you a kind of, well, a fresh perspective, maybe even a shortcut, to thinking about how we make sense of things. We're hoping for some of those aha moments.
Yeah, those clicks when something just makes sense in a new way. We'll get into why we often mistake just agreeing on something for it being, capital T truth.
And touch on the different kinds of unknowns this all points to. Okay, so the book, The Abstractionist Papers, it kicks off with this idea that really makes you stop and think.
Mm-hmm.
It says basically from conception, we start feeling like separate beings, like there's an us inside and a world outside.
But the book suggests this feeling, this strong sense of separation, might not be the ultimate reality. It might be more like our first big interpretation, a human concept we developed very early on.
Like we draw a line, me here, world there.
Exactly. But it uses this lovely analogy to challenge that idea. It describes us as being like temporary eddies in an eternal stream.
Oh, I like that, an eddy.
Yeah.
It looks separate, spinning around, but it's still just the river, right? Part of the flow.
Precisely. So our sense of self, while feeling intensely personal and separate, might just be a pattern, a temporary form within this larger ongoing reality.
Interconnected.
And here's where it gets even more interesting for me. The argument is that we actually create this perceived abstract world. We're not just watching a movie, we're kind of the screenwriters and the actors, existing beyond simple time and space.
It's a challenging idea, and it brings us right back to that central puzzle. Is reality fundamentally abstract, a red space construction, or is it fundamentally real, existing independently in blue space? The book suggests it's not a simple choice. So, okay, if our reality is this internal interpretation, how does that work day to day? How do we even function?
Well, one core concept is that we live in a world of relative realities. Nothing just is on its own. Every idea, every definition, it only gets its meaning by relating to other ideas and definitions.
Like a web.
Exactly. The book calls it a web of interpretation.
That makes total sense. You look up a word in the dictionary,
Yeah.
and the definition uses other words.
Yeah.
And if you look those up,
You're just bouncing around the web, definitions all the way down. The dictionary itself shows you the web in action.
so every framework we use, language, science, whatever, it's all part of this bigger interpretive web. Nothing stands alone.
That's the idea. Everything depends on everything else for its meaning within our red space.
Okay, so we're all kind of weaving our own little sections of this web.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the book mentions some classic ways people have thought about this, like Plato's cave. How does this red space, blue space idea change how we look at that?
Right, Plato's cave. Such a powerful image, isn't it? Prisoners watching shadows, thinking that's reality.
Yeah, until one gets out and sees the real deal, but struggles to explain it.
Yeah.
It's about illusion versus truth.
True. But here's a key difference in perspective. Plato's cave sort of implies there's one shared illusion, one wall everyone's looking at, and then one big truth waiting outside.
Uh-huh.
But the abstractionist's papers suggest something else. It suggests each mind builds its own experience, its own red space interpretation independently. There's no shared movie screen. The illusion, if you want to call it that, is created inside each of us, not delivered from outside.
Wow. Okay. So it's not like the Matrix either then, where you unplug from the simulation into the one real world.
Well, the Matrix definitely captures that feeling, that intuition that maybe things aren't quite what they seem, right?
Yeah, that nagging feeling something's off.
Exactly. But again, like Plato, The matrix suggests escaping into a single definitive truth. The perspective here is more like minds building, meaning side by side, in parallel. We're not all destined to wake up in the same real world. We're each constructing understanding in our own red space, constantly interacting with the cause and effect blue space.
So everyone's got their own internal movie playing, based on the same external events.
Kind of, yeah, which circles back nicely to that idea of separate red spaces.
It does, but hang on. If we're all in these separate interpretation bubbles, how do we ever agree on anything? How does society even function?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? The book argues that it works because our internal models, our red space maps, are functionally aligned enough with the external world, the blue space territory. They work well enough to navigate.
So my map isn't identical to your map, but they're similar enough that we can both use them to get around the same city, so to speak.
Exactly. And the more we interact, the more we experience similar causal patterns in the blue space, the more our red space interpretations tend to harmonize and align. Think about shared language or scientific consensus.
Okay.
But, and this is key, each mind is still operating independently within its own red space. Agreement isn't some magical transfer of meaning or emerging of minds. It's more like parallel construction. We build similar structures because we're using similar inputs from blue space.
Right, like we're all building houses using roughly the same blueprints and materials because we live in the same environment. They look similar, they function similarly, but they are fundamentally separate houses.
That's a great analogy, and this leads directly to what the book calls the feeling of objectivity.
Ah, yes. Tell me about that.
Because our interpretations do align so often, because we achieve consensus, because we can coordinate actions, our minds tend to leap to the conclusion that this agreement means we're tapping into objective truth.
We mistake the harmony for direct access to reality itself.
Precisely. We feel like we're seeing the way things really are simply because others seem to be seeing something very similar in their own red space.
Makes you wonder how much of what we take as solid fact is just really effective group consensus based on shared blue space interactions.
Okay, the book also talks about paradoxes being important. Clues, it calls them. What kind of clues?
Well, paradoxes, things that seem logically impossible or self-contradictory, they show us the edges of our current logic, places where our frameworks start to break down. They flag the boundaries.
Like the chicken and the egg.
Classic example. The paradox works because we're trying to impose a simple linear cause and effect onto something complex, like evolution, which involves cycles and feedback loops. A came before B.
But nature isn't always linear like that.
Exactly. So the value isn't finding the right answer, chicken or egg. It's realizing the question itself is based on a potentially flawed, oversimplified assumption about how things work.
It highlights the limits of that specific way of thinking. Okay, what's another one? The ship of Theseus is another good one. You replace every plank on a ship, one by one. Is it still the same ship?
Oof. Yeah, that's a head-scratcher. Part of me says yes, it's had a continuous existence. But another part says no, none of the original bits are left.
Right. And again, the point isn't necessarily to settle the debate. It's that the paradox forces us to confront our assumptions about what identity or sameness even means. Does it reside purely in the physical stuff? The question makes that idea seem, well, shaky.
So paradoxes are like warning lights on the dashboard of our understanding, saying, check engine.
That's a great way to put it. The book calls them exit signs, pointing towards the edges where our current models, our ways of thinking, might need an upgrade or a rethink, where our red space maps don't quite match the blue space territory anymore.
Okay, our logic has limits. What about just raw perception? The book mentions the biological blindfold. What's that about?
This is super important. It's not just that we don't know everything about how the blue space works externally. It's that we often forget that everything we experience as the world, colors, sounds, textures, is happening inside us, in our red space.
You mean the redness of red isn't actually out there in the object?
Exactly. The object interacts with light in the blue space, our eyes detect that, signals go to our brain, and our brain constructs the experience of red within our subjective red space. The experience is internal.
So all perception is interpretation. It's all happening in red space.
Correct. The blue space is the domain of interaction, of causation. Stuff happens out there, but the meaning, the quality, the experience, that's red space territory. And there's no direct wire transferring my internal experience of red into your head.
We can agree to call certain wavelengths red based on shared blue space interactions, but my internal red might feel different from yours.
Potentially, yes. We have no way to directly compare those subjective experiences. This brings us right back to that unsettling starting point, doesn't it? Nobody truly knows what anything is in some absolute final blue space sense. We only know our red space interpretation of the signals.
And woven through all of this is this constant presence of the unknown.
Absolutely unavoidable. If our understanding is built layer by layer in our red space, based on interactions with blue space, there are bound to be gaps, things we just don't know yet, the known unknowns.
But it goes deeper, right? If the very frameworks we use to understand our logic, our senses, have limits,
Then there could be things we don't even realize we don't know, things outside our current concepts entirely, the unknown unknowns.
and maybe, just maybe,
Yes.
given the fundamental difference between internal subjective experience, red, and external causation, blue, there might be aspects of reality that are just inherently beyond our ability to grasp or interpret directly.
That's the deeper implication, yes.
Yeah.
Aspects of blue space that might be, for us, essentially unknowable, at least within our current biological and conceptual frameworks.
Wow. Okay. Let's just let that sink in for a second. So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems to be our reality, the one we experience. It's a personal construction job. It's built inside our red space through interpretation, not just a mirror reflecting some absolute blue space truth.
And that feeling of agreement, of objectivity, often it's more about our interpretations aligning, harmonizing because of shared blue space interactions, rather than actually sharing the exact same internal reality.
Paradoxes aren't just annoyances. They're useful signs pointing out where our current maps might be wrong or incomplete.
And ultimately, yeah, the core idea we explored in any final absolute sense, maybe nobody really knows what anything fundamentally is. Our understanding is always relative, part of these intricate webs of interpretation in our red space, trying to make sense of the blue space.
So here's the final thought to chew on. If so much of what feels like solid truth is actually a product of this shared interpretation, this red space alignment, what assumptions are you holding on to right now that might be, well, less solid than they seem?
What new questions does thinking this way raise about how you see the world, how you interact with others? It's fascinating stuff to consider.
Absolutely. And if you want to go deeper into this, explore that red space, blue space model more, definitely check out the Abstractionist papers by Luiz von Paumgartten. Again, it's free at www.welcometothe bluespace.com.
Highly recommended. It gives you a lot more to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning.